Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Dave Albert. In this show, I talk about technology, building a company as a CTO and co-founder, and have guests to discuss their roles in technology and entrepreneurship. Today, I'm joined by James Wynne, an anchor of the Cloud Ops team at Pivotal here in Dublin. Thanks for joining us, James.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about your role and yourself?
Yeah, so as I said, my name is James Wynne. I've been working in infrastructure, professional services, sysadmin type roles for approximately the last 20 years or so. Currently in Pivotal, I'm part of the operations team that runs what we call a foundation for a major internal customer to Pivotal. So we're responsible for keeping our for the normal sort of operations things, upgrades, migrations, and feeding and watering the software as such.
Okay, cool. So I met James at a meetup recently where he spoke about ops fire drills and exercises to help keep your operations up to speed and in shape for any real outage events. That was already a topic that had been something I'd been considering, and actually since the event, I actually finally sat down and added a few routines to our Slack bot, so we can now add exercises and drills. So thanks for that.
Okay, cheers.
So what gave you the idea to create that?
So there's a couple of things, I suppose. As I said, I would say for the last 15 to 18 years, I've been on call in some capacity or another. I've worked with obviously teams that have been on call, and over those years I've seen people burn out. I've seen people being ill prepared for going on call and so on. And about a year and a half ago, it was a major initiative which required our team to start going on call for the first time. So based on my experience in other other companies, what I wanted to do was try to create a way that we can onboard engineers into how to go on call. The way I did this was I came up with two concepts. It's kind of related to kind of chaos engineering and stuff like this, but it's first of all, it was a concept of drills and exercises. Someone actually recently said probably better if I called them drills and fires, but that's beside the point. The concept behind both, the concept is that drills are to build up confidence for an engineer and a certain amount of technical competency, whereas exercises or fires is to practice more deeper knowledge and troubleshooting abilities and so on. So for drills, what we try to do, it's very much a confidence building exercise. What we want to do is we create a drill book whereby we'd have a set of maybe 15 or so very simple exercises that should touch, across the board, your infrastructure. And, they might be something like log on to the database to get get the logs. That might be just a simple thing. How much memory is your web server using? And so on. The point is that you try to touch every part of your product base. We then start paging our engineers to see how they respond. The key thing is the first time they do it is to do it in a very kind of comfortable setting. So that's sitting at their own desk with, their own team members around to help. After that, they do it individually, but again, it's at their own desk. Then we start using their own call hardware, in a variety of circumstances. So for instance, are you able to perform these on the face of it, simple tasks, but under difficult conditions? Difficult condition might be from Starbucks, from using someone else's hardware, and so on. So this is the whole concept of drills, is to build up confidence in an engineer to do these sort of things.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's like one of the examples you gave about not having access to the VPN or whatever. That really made a lot of sense because, we've got different rules where you can't connect to our infrastructure through different means. And so if I were out, what would I do?
Yeah. And sometimes the reaction is, hey, I know how to log onto the database. Why are you doing this practice page to log onto the database? That's not teaching me anything new. But like an example for me was when I had a real page, I discovered that my broadband provider gave me an IPv6 IP address, which I wasn't able to whitelist on our IS. So that turned out to be a good drill for me, and it meant I had to figure out new ways to access the system. We also had a situation where someone's VPN client was out of date, and you only actually see these things when you do them for real. Mm-hmm. And once you've done them for real, or once you've been forced to think about them under these simple scenarios, then you can prepare mentally for how to do it for real. One of the things we talk about, and one of the things feedback we've got when we've done these sort of drills with other teams, is everyone intrinsically knows how to do their job, but when they're faced with an unknown, they very often panic. But by practicing the simple thing of getting access to a system, their mind is kind of taken away from the problem, and they get this they go into this kind of muscle memory mode where all they need to do, they don't need to think about the problem for now. They just need to practice the thing that they have built up their muscle memory, and they kind of are able to get to the problem real quickly. We like to relate this, when we're talking to people about mean time to recovery. If you have an SLA with your customers, that will often, say, you need to have a mean time to recovery of 1 hour. But if it takes an engineer 25 minutes or 30 minutes to access where the problem is, your minimum mean time to recovery is immediately 30 minutes.
That also, removes all that cognitive overhead that, we all have that, okay, now I need to figure out the problem, but I also need, like I said, get to the problem. So it's not even just time. It's that you can be actually have adrenaline rushing because you're like, oh my God, I can't remember how I'm supposed to connect to this thing because I haven't connected in 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. And it removes a lot of the pressure. One of the other things that we do is when we're doing these fire drills, we generally try to use the actual tools that an engineer would do. So we page people on their phones. It's kind of interesting is, because we, as the engineers get comfortable and they progress through them, we start doing other things like giving them at random times and so on. We try not to do it out of hours, but, we do vary the times a little bit. But for an engineer, they will often get a shock when they suddenly see, a strange phone number come up on their phone and they're going, what in God's name is this? But by them becoming used to the fact that, okay, this is something I know how to handle. When the call comes in for real, they're not they don't have that deer in the headlights kind of effect.
Yeah, no, that is very, so when I first thought of the fire drills, my impression of what we wanted to do was because we're not ready for chaos engineering yet.
Yep.
We're too small. We don't have enough people. we're closed because we use Kubernetes, so that at least helps, our pods restart themselves. So I can kill a pod, no problem. But the thought was, let's come up with scenarios and then work through all the possibilities of how we would go about solving that problem, so that we sort of had an outline ahead of time, and didn't have to start from zero. But the drills makes even your version of drills.
Yep.
So what I was thinking are actually what you're calling exercises.
Correct.
And the drills take that even a step further and, help avoid having, wait, I need to install this. Oh, my Azure client's out of date. And so is the, Cube controller, Cube Cuddle.
Yeah.
So
it's, and like chaos engineering is kind of this kind of new buzzword, kind of cool thing to do. But I very often think that it's designed, or the way it's been talked about, it's designed for the cool kids. But, you have to start somewhere. Trying to practice what it looks like if you lose an entire availability zone. It's a cool exercise, but, it's not really helping someone to build up confidence by setting their house on fire for the first time. The way to build up confidence is for let them do their day job in different conditions. One of the other interesting things is this is really cool for kind of a startup to start bringing people on board and on call, and kind of junior engineers, and getting people used to this brand new system. And one of the things we also found is kind of in larger organizations, we very often have these kind of services that aren't, let's say, part of their core product or a legacy product or whatever. And the institutional memory of how to do these things gets lost, or else gets siloed. But by including, access to these systems in your drills is a great way to keep that memory fresh, and also to spread it out of the silo. In a very safe manner that people don't feel stressed about it. I tell the story about a particular platform I used to look after. It was very legacy, almost never got calls about it. It was running more or less solidly for 7 years or something ridiculous. And I was the only person in the organization who knew how to log in, which immediately is not a good situation. But there was a particular scenario where we did have to log in, and the RSA keys the batteries in the RSA keys had gone. Simply because nobody had gone near the platform in 2 years. So it's another example whereby, a simple drill like that, it just crops up these issues before you actually have to do it for real.
Yeah, some of these things you just can't plan for without doing something like these drills. So I'm really glad that I've actually started to create the ability within our Slack bot to be able to do it. I still have to actually call the bot's function to make it give me a drill. Yeah.
I think we're working on a concourse pipeline to do a similar sort of thing. So it's, but the drills are important for building up confidence and muscle memory. I suppose the next thing is maybe talk about exercises, which is the next kind of level up. So for exercises, what we try to do is have this kind of more of a team-based thing rather than kind of people working on their own. What we try to do there is we kind of set the house on fire this time, but we try to come up with scenarios that are technically complex and may require you to interact with other teams around you. So if you can imagine the operations team, it's a complex application running on it, but you may need support from your database team. You may need support from your firewall or networking team or whoever it is. What we try to do is we try to organize scenarios whereby we break something in a complex manner, and we then page someone, and they then have to follow through and troubleshoot, hopefully with with the exercises, with the drills that they've already built up, they should be able to react pretty quickly and get to where they need to troubleshoot pretty quickly. One thing I will say is, though, just kind of go back, when somebody's paged with a drill, they are paged in a very prescriptive, this is what you need to do. It is log on to the database, get the last line of logs.
Yeah.
That's it. In this kind of exercise or fire manner, it's actually very different. They're given almost minimum information. They're given what a customer might see. Your server is given 500 errors. That's it. Mm-hmm. So they immediately have to figure out what server. They might have to figure out, where's that hosted? How do I log in? And so on. But again, because they've built up the muscle memory, that bit should become very easy, very quick. And they should be able to start troubleshooting. So drills are not there to trick someone. Exercises, you can kind of try to screw around with people and exercise them.
Yeah, but it also should be legitimate. It should not be the most complex, bizarre bug you've ever seen. Though, one of the things that I also plan to do is with each outage, add it in and probably, document out in Confluence what it was so that.
Yeah. So that's an excellent point. Your exercise shouldn't be based around a problem that wouldn't occur in real life. So they should be designed to be as realistic as possible. I'll give kind of two examples of it. A good exercise actually to try is to simulate clock drift on a couple of your servers. Because that generally starts breaking things like SSL and has all sorts of weird symptoms. And it's actually can be surprisingly difficult to troubleshoot. And we've run these exercises several times with people, and it's actually quite interesting. When we do both drills and exercises, we encourage people to continuously update, let's say, PagerDuty or whatever it is you're tracking your incident with. And I was running one of these exercises, and the engineer kept on sending me posting log entries, and each time they did, the log entry had naturally a timestamp in it, and the post time had a timestamp in it. And they were basically kept on posting this, saying, no, this isn't actually our problem. What we would do is escalate. And this kind of went on until I eventually sent them back a screenshot of both timestamps. And that was an example of a good simulation. And possibly an example of a bad simulation is someone was trying to simulate network congestion drop packets on a network. And it did this by using a set of IP table rules, which seems like a reasonable thing to do. The problem is what the engineers troubleshooting this were doing was counting packets using ping. The IP tables rules didn't account for ICMP, so they were seeing 0 packet loss. So this made it very difficult to troubleshoot. So when creating scenarios, try to be realistic as possible. One of the things that was alluded to just there is I'll keep logs of your real instances, your real incidents, and build up a kind of a manual or a set of these things. Talk to other teams. In our case, we often look at support tickets that real customers come along, and we kind of go, would one of our other teams be able to solve this? And with that, you're able to build this big, broad spectrum of exercises for people to experience.
That's some of the ones that I've already put in our system. We shipped a test, and it worked, and everything's fine. And now we shipped a prod, and the pods just keep restarting. So it doesn't have to be complex, but it's things that actually crop up, and knowing beforehand a new person comes in, they don't have to have experienced that to say, well, let me check the config maps to make sure that the config maps match. Let me make sure that the secrets match.
So, and it is good for learning. It's also good for learning your environment. There's a colleague of mine who does this great talk about kind of what we call Dungeons and Dragons exercises. And so what we would do is we would take a scenario and we'd have a room full of, engineers, and you would have two people being kind of dungeon master. And the first person might call out, okay, our main application server is giving 500 errors. What do you do? And then from the group there, they will, say, log on to your Nginx server, get your log files or whatever it is. And so the dungeon master will then conceptually go, okay, you've logged on. What do you do now? Oh, check for errors. There's no errors. What do you do now? Oh, check for memory utilization, check for disk, whatever it is. And as you give them clues, they start building up a mental model of, what the problem is. And as a group exercise, people can then start discussing it and go, hey, why did you check for disk space but didn't check for insufficient inodes? Why? Yeah, I'm trying to take more examples, but it allows people to kind of, to start discussing this, and then people kind of go, actually, that's kind of a good troubleshooting technique. I wouldn't have thought of running an S trace. I wouldn't have thought of looking for DNS responses on we're using TCP dump or whatever. And it becomes a discussion, and people build up a more holistic way of troubleshooting. One of as I said, my colleague, who gave a great talk on this recently, one of the things, the way she explains it out, she starts off with this really simple kind of Dungeon Dragon scenario. There's a Q&A. The audience solves it pretty quickly. But then she goes, then the next day this happened. So the audience now from the first scenario has learned a little bit about her infrastructure, and they can use that knowledge and leverage that to go onto the day 2 problem. And then she goes, and then the next day this happened. And again, whatever. From answering the second exercise, a little bit more, so it helps you answer the third exercise and so on. But while she's doing this, she has a whiteboard, and she's actually drawing out her infrastructure. So I'm sure many people have joined a new company, and at some point someone's brought you into a room and has brought up a massive Visio or PowerPoint or whatever the hell it is, and with 1 million boxes on it, and they're telling you that this connects to that, but only if this connects to that, and you can authenticate against the other thing. And, just goes in one ear, out the other. But her framing on solving these small problems and progressing allowed the audience to start building a mental map of her infrastructure in a way that's really compelling and a way that's memorable. And so these sort of Dungeons and Dragons exercises are a really good learning tool in situations like that.
That's really neat. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of an interesting idea that you could possibly use maybe the first couple of steps for an interviewing.
Possibly, yeah.
Actually taking those add-on bits, as opposed to just dumping some random question. Taking questions that build on each other based on your real infrastructure. So that you bring them along as opposed to just dumping that on someone. You'll learn more about the way they learn and think.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, my colleagues' versions of Dungeons and Dragons is it is really interesting. I think she kind of even explains the whole idea. You're in a dark dungeon, and she's kind of talking about, as you learn more and more of this kind of labyrinth gets illuminated, and the more illuminated it gets, the more you can illuminate. And it was, in my mind, it was a really interesting way to learn about her, make believe infrastructure. It's it's a really good tool. And by the way, that's a good tool for any either new engineer or for an experienced engineer. One of the ones we did was actually when a brand new team was being formed. It was actually a good bonding session as well for the team, because they got to know how their new workmates kind of taught, what sort of, skill sets and so on. So it's, for us, it's really interesting. I might be able to provide you a link to that talk. It's pretty good.
Please do. Yeah, that sounds good. That's the exposing with the light and finding your way in the darkness. That really is what we do.
Yep, absolutely.
And I think that may be why so many of us, especially those of us that have been doing this for quite some time, have found interest in the old text-based games or the multi-user dungeons, MUDs back in the day. That's we're basically doing that. So for those of you that are a bit too young to know what a MUD or a multi-user dungeon is, it was text-based World of Warcraft, basically.
Absolutely, yeah. Turn left.
Yeah. But now we just do that with ping and trace route.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a real fun exercise. You reminded me of something there, and I can't for the life of me remember what it was. Yeah, it's a good thing. And I would find like this is a really good exercise to put your team through with real things. Another kind of so like we've had two examples of exercises now. One is to break stuff in a wacky way and see how your team responds to it. And then we had the kind of conceptual Dungeons and Dragons exercise. But one of the first exercises we kind of mentioned to people, and remember this time exercises should be more of a group thing, is it's a real kind of no-op exercise that when you suggest to a bunch of engineers, hey, we're going to do this, they look at you as if, do you think we are 4-year-olds? This is like the silliest imaginable thing. And what you do is you get everyone to sit around in a conference room or a virtual conference room, and the first person page is Billy page is Mary page is Annie, and you go around in a circle. And I've been in teams where we said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And they're kind of going, oh, I thought you were going to be here to break stuff and show us how cool things are. And I goes, no, let's do this first. And what we have found out nearly every single time we've done this is at least one person hasn't, let's say, got PagerDuty installed. One person has put in their wrong phone number because they only just moved to that country 6 months ago or whatever. And this, what on the face of it sounds like a silly exercise, actually is probably the single most useful exercise you can do. And nearly every team should try to do this once in a while, especially for people who don't get called very often. In fact, we have we're in a pretty lucky position, and I hope I don't anger the gods of IT by saying this. We have a situation at the moment where we call on-call atrophy, which means we don't get called enough. And what happens is people change their phone number, and because they haven't got called, they don't receive the call, which is obviously a really bad thing. So we've started, the on-call engineers have agreed that once a week while they're on call between, let's say, 6 o'clock in the evening and 9 o'clock in the evening, they will receive one of these simple drills. And that's, when I told other people, oh yeah, this is what we're going to do, they're going, oh my God, I'd be so upset. And I said, well, the people who are on call, they see this, they're able to do it successfully. They know that if they get a real call anytime during the week, they are now prepared. Yeah. And so instead of becoming a negative thing, the feedback from all the engineers has been, actually, this was a really positive thing. It was a reassuring thing for them. Again, it's kind of building up confidence.
Well, that's the big thing. I mean, most of us wouldn't be in the situations we're in if we weren't at least pretty good at what we do, right? So usually in the past, we've been able to figure it out. Mm-hmm. But that black box staring at you,
yeah,
when the pressure's on, that for some of us anyway, it can be nearly debilitating.
Yeah, absolutely. I said I've done this a lot of teams, and sometimes like we did a particular one, a particular kind of role play, and my suggestion going into this was to do the drill things, and then we'll come along and facilitate the role play. The team kind of said, "Oh, we didn't have enough time, and they all know how to do this." So we said, "Okay, so let's do the role play." And the engineers literally looked like they were deer in the headlights. And the feedback from doing the drill was still positive because they felt they got a better understanding. But also the feedback was, I would have actually liked to have done the simple things.
Yeah.
And I think I would have been more prepared. So the thing about this is don't be cool. Do what's best. Kind of reminds me of like my nephew is, he is. He's black belt in kickboxing. And, his training is repeating the same movement over and over and over again. And an outsider looking in and say, "Oh, that seems like a stupid thing." But then when you see him at a competition, he has the muscle memory built up that he's able to do these moves super quick and super competency. So that's the way you should think of these things.
But yeah, any sport, your first day, you don't go and play a match against the hardest opponent you'll have. You don't climb in the boxing ring and just start swinging. You learn the fundamentals. And it's not even just learning them, because even if you've been away and come back and nobody's having an incident every day of the exact same kind, hopefully.
Yeah. The Crucible snooker is on at the moment, and these are like the top snooker players in the world. And if you watch them on their break, they're sitting there potting balls from set pieces over and over and over again. It's, this is something that everyone benefits from.
Yeah. Have you had anybody stay unhappy with it after doing it?
No, because people invariably do get caught out. Caught out sounds a bit strong, but do kind of recognize, I wouldn't have been able to do this for real. Everyone's kind of happy that they've done it. And also, there's also kind of a shock factor as well. It's like I did the pass the pager instance I was saying earlier on, where it's like someone's phone number is wrong. We were in a room with 8 people. We got to the 4th person and it was like, oh my God, it's the wrong phone number. Immediately, the remaining 4 people took out and were checking their phone number because they didn't want to be that guy. And so, even though they weren't the person who got who discovered this situation, all of them benefited from it and suddenly went, "Okay, this was actually a good idea." Maybe your team is pretty perfect, but these things happen. As I said, like, actually, very first time I got a call out in here, I discovered that some of the CLI tools I needed were out of date. And I was like, okay, I'm sitting there preaching to people to do this, and here it is. My laptop has the wrong software. So, yeah, people always I feel people always benefit from it.
Yeah, definitely. How are you keeping track of your drills and your exercises?
So we've kind of a centralized, it's a little bit too ad hoc. It's a little bit too ad hoc. Some of the other teams are getting a lot better at us. They've kind of come back and started teaching us stuff, which is good. But what we do is we have a Google Doc with kind of the set of 15 drills that we kind of core do. Below us is basically each team member, and every team member needs to do the entire set of drills at least once. Then after that, they should be kind of given each drill kind of randomly spread out. But they should be able to do every one of the drills under various circumstances. And that's before they're suitable, or they will feel confident enough to go on call. We then try to just keep a log to make sure, individuals kind of have received at least one or two of these drills, maybe every quarter or every couple of weeks. One of the other things that we try to do as a practice is that the off-going on-call person pages the ongoing on-call person at some point before the handover occurs. Mm-hmm. So that means that, the ongoing person has confidence that, they have the right equipment and so forth. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the practices. So it's kind of the logbook and then this kind of handover page as well. The other practice is what I'm doing now, which is the kind of the on-call atrophy thing, is to do this slightly out of hours. That's kind of ad hoc at the moment, but, I think I said this earlier, we're building up concourse pipelines to, start triggering these things and automating a lot of this. That's generally how we do it.
Other than what you've mentioned, are there any other mistakes that people should look out for when they begin trying to do these?
This is going to answer a completely different question that you didn't ask.
No problem.
This is possibly a mistake I made designing these things, and it was actually at the meetup. Someone asked a question, and I kind of thought about it, and I actually think it was a good addition. So, I do recommend that people kind of use all the tools that they would use handling a real incident. And someone asked me, he says, "Do you include your SLA in that?" And I hadn't actually thought about it. And then I said, actually, no, that is actually dead right. We try not to put someone under pressure for either drills or exercises. We want the experience to be a learning experience. We don't want to turn it into a race. We don't want to turn it into a stressful thing where they don't want to get, where they don't want to take part. So my initial reaction was, if we turn it into an SLA thing, this could this could turn this into a kind of the bosses versus the engineers type thing. But then kind of thought about it a bit more, because you don't necessarily have to add that additional pressure, but you do have to add those best practices.
Yeah.
So the SLA thing is, make sure you answer within, 15 minutes, to have a response in 30 minutes, hourly updates and so on. So that's something that's, a pretty useful addition to these sort of exercises and drills.
Yeah, that's. I can't remember where it was I heard it, but I think it was a card game. Mm-hmm. Card game about an ops fire drill card game.
Oh, okay.
And basically, you only get one turn at a time, so you can only play one card. And then one of the things that comes up is, well, now you have this is more for a larger company than a startup, but you have a VP breathing down your neck because you haven't contacted them.
Yeah.
Maybe you should have started to delegate some of the tasks.
Yeah. And that's actually a really good point. A lot of these concepts I've taken from, the Google SRE book, and it has particular chapters about incident handling. And in that, it talks about this idea of having an instant commander. It talks about having kind of someone handle communication and so on. That's another thing you should do when you're doing these group exercises, is to start delegating these tasks and figuring out who does what when. A particular real incident I was involved with was quite high profile, and we did that delegation and it worked incredibly well. One of the product managers basically was the incident commander. Another product manager took over communications with outside factors and with leadership and so on, and it worked incredibly smoothly. But I think one of the real reasons it worked incredibly smoothly was we had gone through this almost exact scenario just 2 weeks earlier for a different customer site. And was just complete serendipity that almost the exact same thing happened in the exact same scenario under a different situation. And it was weird, to say the least.
So on with the, contacting the people and the incident communication management. I don't know how big Pivotal is. I'm guarantee you it's bigger than my small startup. But what we do is, what we try to do, is spin up a Slack channel specifically for the incident. And then that way people can poke their heads in and don't have to keep asking, what's the story? What's the story? What's the story?
Yeah. And there's a couple of ways to handle this. I've seen it's a couple of ways to handle it. I think it's important that as a team, you decide on a single way.
Yes.
B,
as with almost everything.
Correct. And B, as a kind of to external factors, that they understand a single way in as well. So an example might be, each team's Slack channel in Pivotal, we have, if you look at the channel description, we included things like an interrupt and a couple of other information like that. But if we have something going on, we will have that kind of as bold as you can at the top of the Slack channel. So people know, don't spam the team channel with this, go to this other Slack channel, let's say, go to the status duty, PagerDuty page, go to this, status.io, can't remember there's a
status pages.
Status page, yeah.
Is that an Atlassian product? Mm-hmm. Is that Atlassian?
I think it is. I'm not sure.
They're everywhere.
But the point is to make sure there's a kind of a uniform communication there. You've reminded me of something and it's completely gone from my mind, about a particular real instance I had. And, now I remember what it was. One of the other things we find useful is, or have found useful in other companies is we have this concept of commercial on call. So the way that worked was you had your typical engineering on call, kind of know and love, fixing servers at 3 a.m. But what we also had this concept of a commercial on call. And what would happen there is if an incident was running longer or if an incident the engineer felt was like, okay, this could have a serious business impact, they would call the commercial on call, who would then start liaising with the client, and they would become responsible for funneling information, giving updates, and so on. So the kind of concept there is, rather than having the angry VP of your customer screaming at the engineer, what you had kind of the teamwork between, let's say, the commercial side of the business and the engineering side of the business. And one assumes, because you're both teammates, that there would be more empathy there to allow the engineer to do what they're good at, and also let the commercial person do what they're good at, which is communicating to the customer. So that was another idea I've seen. Yeah,
that's good. It seems like all we've talked about here is just removing the stress from the person trying to make things right.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If I'm only kind of a pretty small sample size, but when you see people coming in for interviews or applying for jobs or joining a new company, when they hear the words on call, it is immediate stressor. Very often it's a situation where people will say, no, I don't want this job, or, it becomes a deal breaker for people. But that's why I feel so important, and I'm quite passionate about it, is to make it a role that becomes exciting rather than something that's going to burn you out. Yeah. I talked briefly about the Google SRE, one of the heads of Google SRE, there's this, quote from one of his children, and it was something along the lines of, don't panic when the crisis is happening or you won't enjoy it. What we talked about earlier on was doing these text-based adventure games. Tech people like solving problems. They don't like being under stress though.
Yes.
So if you're able to get in and start solving a problem really quickly, and you've kind of done this sort of stuff before, it actually can become a pretty good buzz.
Yeah, absolutely. That's growth happens when you're just outside your sphere of comfort. And if you have to wade through the muck to get to that edge, you're already so worn down that it's really hard to enjoy that growth factor.
Yeah. And, again, to go back to the exercises, as I said, like the example I get of clock drift is like when you see it, it's a kind of one command fix. And the nature of the problem doesn't necessarily have to be kind of clever or difficult or whatever, but there used to be this kind of thing. There's no such thing as hard questions if you know the answer. So, what might seem straightforward to one person could be incredibly difficult to another. But again, by doing the kind of bigger scale exercises, you will find this out. And B, by doing the Dungeons and Dragons exercises as a group, you get to discuss these things and you can get to understand why one of the engineers thinks, doing an S trace is the obvious thing, whereas one of your other engineers will just read the source code. It's very different.
Yeah. And one thing I would add to that is our plans. I keep saying plans since we haven't actually implemented yet, but would be to identify steps we could take to prevent that issue from ever happening. Doesn't mean you can actually implement it now, but as long as you've identified something that you could possibly do in the future to make it a non-issue.
Yeah, I've interesting thoughts about this. I think it was actually you who asked this question. So RCAs are really important for a whole heap of reasons. Root cause analysis, are really important to look at your, what caused this problem. And, again, in the SRE book, it talks about kind of doing postmortems and so forth. And I think it is important. And I think especially if it was a process failure, it's very important to identify this process failure and try to fix the process. And I'm certainly encouraged doing RCAs, but you also have to live in the real world whereby, to be frank, 100% uptime for everything all the time over a long enough period of time is just not factually or possible.
Absolutely.
So it means that rather than building up a whole heap of RCAs of incidents that will probably never happen again, or should I say playbooks based on RCAs, for instance, that will probably never happen again. What you need to do is build up the holistic skills to solve the generic problem. And I don't want to go too far afield. I have a good example of this is monitoring. So you have some sort of wacky thing and a log file overruns or something is misconfigured and it creates 1 million 0-byte files or whatever it is. And you run out of inodes. And you often get this thing. It's like, oh, why didn't we monitor that? And it was immediately, okay, we have to set up monitoring for this one very weird edge case. By the way, inodes is not an edge case, but that's in here. And you have to putting it in, and you may then have a playbook. It's like, oh, before the weekend, always check, the number of inodes or whatever. And what happens there is people end up what I call cargo culting what they're doing. So you have these kind of 15 steps for checking exotic parts of your system that nobody really understands, but it was because they came out of an RCA and were now put into a playbook that are now part of some sort of checklist. But it gives your engineers no holistic knowledge on how to actually troubleshoot. So I've kind of, sometimes these sort of things are useful to a small degree, but for me, the holistic steps of kind of building up muscle memory and then building up the ways to apply it is far more valuable. Oh,
I absolutely agree. But I also think there's some value in pre-mortems. So that's what I'm considering here is that by doing the Dungeons and Dragons exercises, especially of something that actually has happened.
Yep.
Right. Especially the example I gave of We shipped it to test. Everything's fine. So now when we tell our bot to ship it to prod, why is it failing? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we know we need to check the secrets in the config maps. Mm-hmm. That could be an actual gate to prevent the delivery to production. So that's the sort of thing I'm talking about, not those weird.
That is a good example of a gate. A bad example of a gate is, obscure memory leak in the only actually, I remember during the Sydney Olympics, the Australian government, for television reasons or whatever, decided to shift the date that they did daylight savings.
Oh my gosh. That's not going to mess anything up.
And it messed lots of things up.
Well, so I've heard the European Union is considering not doing daylight savings time. As a person, that's fantastic.
Yeah, as a computer,
as a computer person, that's scary.
Well, all I gotta say is everything should be in UTC all the time anyway. But that's neither here nor there. But the upshot of this was, I think Sun still owned it at the time. Sun had to ship emergency patches to the JDKs. And we had one customer that was based in Australia who didn't patch their JDK, and wacky things started happening. So,
of course it did. Oh, my goodness.
So, that's something that A, probably couldn't be practiced for, but B, some holistic troubleshooting steps might be able to kind of figure out that. And B, it's something that, if you put it onto a playbook or monitor or whatever, that doesn't make any sense because, daylight savings doesn't suddenly get switched off on a regular basis.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet?
No, I think that's kind of a lot of things. I would have a tendency to talk forever, but unfortunately I can't this evening.
I think we could probably do a whole other episode on monitoring.
Oh, don't get me started on monitoring. I can tell you, I could start, I could certainly talk a lot about monitoring.
Well, I'd enjoy that. Okay. So what's next within this fire drill realm? For you I
have a blog post that I'm hoping to come out soon, which kind of covers a lot of these topics, possibly puts a bit more structure on it.
Great.
So that's the kind of main thing for me at the moment. Within our organization, we kind of evangelize doing these sort of things. We've also we've started trying to include these customers, these practices and customs on when we're trying to onboard new customers. That's had interesting effects, and it's, the feedback so far has been quite positive. So.
Cool. Yeah. If you get that done soon, I'll attach it to the show notes.
Okay.
I can always add it later.
Okay. Cheers.
So what would you ask our technical listeners to do in relation to what we've talked about? So the CTOs, the ops types,
I think they should, the drill things, to seasoned engineers, there's often a pushback. We have discussed this a lot. I don't want to kind of go into it, but I do think they should kind of champion these ideas, because very often a way to champion them is get the seasoned engineer to put together the initial drill book. I think the benefits for someone who's just joined the team and someone just being on board the team are pretty self-evident. I think the Dungeons and Dragons exercise, again, for new members is incredibly interesting. And for a team, it's actually a great team building thing. Like, maybe one Friday a quarter, you do a team building, get some beers in and set aside an hour and let people have some fun while they're learning stuff and learning new things. So that's the sort of thing, that's the kind of, in a way, the technical value of a lot of this. I would then kind of frame to the people who signed the checks, maybe is kind of framing the importance of this. I've already discussed about kind of things like mean time to recovery. The ability to have an engineer get their hands on the problem as soon as possible is hugely valuable. It will also, doing these sort of things will hopefully also encourage or give confidence to more people to go on call. If you have more people going on call, it means your support roster gets bigger. You don't have people suffering burnout by getting continuously on call for long periods of time. Cuts down, which in turn cuts down employee churn. There's like a huge human benefit to this. There's another colleague of mine gives a great talk about building HA into humans. And a lot of what she talks about is, people being burnt out. I've no colleague of mine from a colleague of mine who, was not only on call for 30 days straight, but was actually called out for 30 days straight.
Oh my gosh.
And they more or less rage quit the company.
Yeah, I can imagine.
That, having to replace an engineer is an expensive thing. So doing these things to get more people on call stops that sort of stuff happening. And, and apart from that, it's a good human thing to do.
Mm. Yeah, that's one thing definitely to consider as co-founders or anyone pushing the product. Mm-hmm. You're also concerned with how stable your product is for your users or customers. Mm-hmm. So it's not wasted time by making sure that you can support issues as they come up. Mm-hmm. It can actually be more important than pushing new features sometimes.
Well, I've already kind of used the expression for kind of HA for humans. Mm-hmm. You're going to spend, I'm going to use Oracle because that's my go-to example of software for everything. But you go off, you spend millions of dollars, millions of euro on HA clustered licenses for Oracle and so on. So, is spending kind of 15 minutes a week on these sort of exercises, which will, allow someone to get to fix this Oracle cluster, an expensive thing? And my mind answer is no. Yeah. And it's a huge amount of value.
Yeah. Great. So how can people reach you?
I probably drop my email address on.
Sure. Yeah. I'll stick that in the show notes.
Okay, cool.
All right. Well, thanks very much. Mm-hmm. It's a pleasure.
Okay. Cheers.
And thank you everyone for listening. Until next time, remember, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.